Hello, everyone. This is High Point Mayor Jay Wagner calling to order our special call meeting of the High Point City Council for March 1st, 3:30 p.m. Before we begin, I will call the roll. Those present in City Hall are Councilman Tyrone Johnson, the Mayor Pro Tem Britt Moore. I am President of City Hall, and as is Councilman Cyril Jefferson and Councilman Wesley Hudson. Councilman Michael Holmes, are you with us remotely?
I am.
Okay. Councilwoman Monica Peters, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Councilman Chris Williams, are you with us remotely? Councilman Victor Jones, are you with us remotely?
I am.
Okay, so we have 8 of the 9 members of council. That constitutes a quorum. I think Councilman Williams is on his way. We'll go ahead and begin today's meeting with a briefing on potential changes to our rezoning procedures. I presume Lee Burnett is the speaker on that since he's here.
Lee is going to brief us on the subject. It's my understanding that this has been somewhat discussed among some of the council members. This is a possibility of changing our current procedure of cases, zoning cases going through the planning and zoning board and then coming to council for final action. Greensboro, I know, has this system as well as some other cities in North Carolina. And this would, it would go to the zoning board, case would go to the zoning board, and then unless it was appealed for by one party or another, it would not come to the city council. It would, that would be the final action on it. So Lee's done some research on this over the years. It's come up as discussion points at various past councils. They've never elected to move forward with it. It would take some local legislation, and local legislation deadline is Wednesday. So we have to move quickly if we're going to move in this direction. So,
okay, yes, sir. To delegate some or all some of your zoning decision authority to the Planning and Zoning Commission, you basically need 2 actions. One is a local bill or local enabling legislation approved by the General Assembly. And the second after that would be a local ordinance adopted by the City Council that would spell out the details of that authority. Basically, North Carolina state statutes enable local governments to exercise zoning authority, which you do. If a local government exercises zoning authority, then state law requires that you have a planning board. High Point, you call it your Planning and Zoning Commission. Some other jurisdictions call it a zoning commission. Some of it call it a planning commission. It's all basically the same thing. It's a planning agency, and the state statutes refer to it as a planning board. And that planning board is required by state law to advise the City Council on a variety of planning and development matters, including any zoning decisions. Some local governments, as Randy mentioned, have received special legislation or special authority to from the General Assembly that enables them to delegate some of that zoning decision-making authority to their planning board after they hold a hearing, and as Randy mentioned, which is also subject to appeal to the City Council. Some of the example jurisdictions out there, Greensboro was enabled with this authority in 1969. I think they're probably about the first jurisdiction in the state that was enabled with that authority. Gifford County followed in 1985. They had actually in 1979, they were granting enabling authority by the General Assembly to delegate their street abandonment process to their planning board. So their planning board not only decides street abandonments, they also decide their zoning decisions. The city of Gastonia, as well as Cabarrus County and the cities within Cabarrus County were enabled with that authority in 1993. Durham County and Durham City in 1993. Randolph County in 2017, Davison County in 2018, and Brunswick County in 2019. That may not be every city or jurisdiction in the state, but I think that's a There may be one or two or a few that, but by the vast majority in North Carolina, most do not. But as you can see, there are a number around the Triad area that do have that authority, whether they exercise it or not. A couple remarks on those examples. The authority that was granted to either enable the planning board to act on either rezonings or zoning map amendments. And there is a distinctional difference. In Greensboro and Guilford County, they can act on rezonings. In some of the other jurisdictions, they can act on zoning map amendments. And basically the distinction is that in Greensboro, for example, they cannot act on initial zoning. So if it's a zoning associated with annexation, they cannot act on it. The planning board cannot, only the city council. However, it is a rezoning once the property is inside the jurisdiction with initial or original city zoning, and there's a landowner that requests rezoning, then the planning board can act on that decision. So there are some distinctional differences between the two. Some are using the authority and some are not. I don't believe some of the nearby counties are using it to the full extent that they were enabled. Some local governments, by local ordinance, have further refined or limited the delegation authority. For example, some of the jurisdictions that are enabled that authority have basically said the planning board can make the decision if it's a unanimous decision. And if it's not a unanimous decision, then it would go on to that particular governing body. The authority to adopt the development ordinance or any text amendment has not been delegated by any example I could find. So we're basically talking about rezonings or map amendments. High point, I'm not aware of any local bills that's been previously introduced for the benefit of the city. However, the city council, and as Randy mentioned, or committee of council has explored this about 3 times over the last 25 years. I think the most recent was about 2005. A couple things just to note. One, this is a city council decision whether or not to seek this authority. If the council is interested in pursuing it, then the first thing is to obtain the enabling authority from the General Assembly through a local bill. That will establish any initial constraints. Some of the initial bills that were adopted for Greensboro and Guilford County are much broader written than, say, some of the more recent ones. They will establish any kind of constraint, and every one of them has had a constraint of an appeal to the city council provision, meaning that there has to be some provision in your local ordinance that enables somebody to appeal it within whatever parameters the General Assembly may have spelled out to the governing body. And I would say that you ought to consider broad enabling authority. For example, seek zoning map amendments, not just rezonings. Then you can decide whether or not you want to refine it further and only allow rezonings versus, say, all zoning map amendments and that type of thing. That's one of the things I think that the prior considerations that the city council in the past had sort of tripped over. They were more involved with the details of how they would agree to pass that decision-making authority on to the P&Z than just seeking to obtain the authority. Because if you obtain the authority, there's no requirement that you act on that. As I mentioned, some of these jurisdictions haven't pursued any of that authority. But if you do obtain the authority, then you can decide as a council what the parameters are, whether you utilize the authority or whether you don't utilize the authority. One other thing to mention, sort of get a little bit off here a little bit, but 160D is a piece of planning legislation that consolidates the city and the county statutes. And all the jurisdictions right now in North Carolina have either adopted or in the process of adopting amendments to their development ordinances for 160D. That's the section referenced in the statutes. My staff right now is currently working on those amendments, and they'll probably be coming to the council in a few months. They have to be adopted by July 1. These are mainly procedural in effect, but for the most part, the one thing that relates to this discussion, I think, is that 160D prohibits third-party rezonings. And third-party rezonings is someone other than the landowner or the city itself initiating the zoning map amendment. For many years, under state law, it was allowed. The city of High Point in 1990 obtained special enabling legislation that basically only enabled the city council and the landowner to initiate the zoning application. In other words, it prohibited third-party rezonings in High Point. If the council is interested in pursuing a local bill that would enable the P&Z to make zoning decisions, I would also recommend consideration of removal of that special legislation provision that only that prohibits third party, because the way it's written is that the city council and the landowner are the only ones that can file the request. It basically prohibits the Planning and Zoning Commission from filing or initiating a zoning map amendment. So if you're going to enable a body to act on a zoning application, you should also enable that body to file or initiate that zoning application. So again, that's one comment that I would make, that if you do pursue that you also at the same time repeal that provision and thus let the state statutes 160D govern, which still prohibit third-party rezonings outside the city government and outside the landowner. And finally, if local legislation is adopted, then would be the time for the city council to consider the specifics, whether or not you want to fully pursue that, to what degree, under what procedure. After that's decided, then a text amendment would need to be drafted. That text amendment would be put out for public review and comment, and then go through the typical procedure for Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation, public hearing, and then city council action. That's it in a nutshell.
One further clarification, Lee, correct me if I'm wrong on this. When we say that it's appealed, that there has to be an appeal process in the procedure, there's two appeals that could take place. One is certainly the landowner or petitioner that is filing for that rezoning. The other, as I understanding, is also the city council could appeal and make sure that if they did not agree with the zoning board, that they could appeal, and that case would then come up to them or to you for final action.
When you say council appeals, you're talking about majority of council has to vote to appeal, or two members of council want to appeal? What's the?
I think that would. Okay.
Yeah. It depends on how the legislation's written, but basically any person, like in, for example, Greensboro, any person can appeal it, meaning one individual city council person can bring it forward. Any average citizen, aggrieved or non-aggrieved, can bring it forward. So it depends on how the legislation is actually written. So that's what I'm saying is that it's ultimately how it's written, and then some of them have an appeal period spelled in it for 15 days. Others do not, and leave it up to the local jurisdiction to decide what the appeal period is. So for appealing it. So yeah.
Referring to the local ordinance?
Yeah. No, I'm talking, the local bill that's adopted by the General Assembly. Yeah. The one for Greensboro is probably 3 sentences long. The one for Randolph and Davidson County is probably a good full paragraph. So that just shows you the distinctional differences.
So Lee, it's Councilman Moore, if it's a lot going on there, but if it looks like there's a time deadline that we're looking at, and this has been talked about before, but if we move forward on the broad-based blanket of local legislation for the authority to do so, and that's approved, number one, then this council or councils going forward have the ability to make more specific the authority given, correct?
Correct.
And is there a time frame associated if we get this approval? It doesn't sound like it from some of the other towns you've just listed. If we just obtain the authority, it gives us the opportunity to use it, correct?
That's correct. Yes, sir. None of the other bills that I mentioned or that were adopted had any kind of time frame in there. Just like you're enabled, and I say enabled, you're empowered, you're authorized to have zoning authority. You're also authorized and empowered not to utilize your zoning authority. There's nothing in North Carolina law that requires a city to utilize zoning. So the same thing would apply to this type of provision as well, is that you could decide to use it, not to use it under certain standards, modify those standards, repeal it completely, as the councils may come and go,
Right.
over the years.
Well, to my fellow council members, I feel like that it's something we should move forward with the first step to authorize the necessary procedures to take place to apply for the local legislation. At that point, I think we can do some more refining, more discussion between ourselves and staff going forward. But I think it could be I don't know if tool's the right word. I think it could be an opportunity to initiate something that continues our efforts of making High Point a more business-friendly, competitive environment out there, and help it be more efficient in the processes.
I concur.
Anyone else have any questions? Anyone online maybe have any questions for Mr. Burnett?
So this is Councilman Jefferson. In us moving forward to petition or whatever the process is called, requesting maybe it is for the general bill, we can decide what all allowances we want in that general bill. And your recommendation is to make that very broad sort of request as far as scope, right?
Yes. I mean, what I've seen just historically in the past, the prior councils had spent a lot of time talking about the details of how they would support it or not support it, and it never really got off the ground.
Yeah.
It's going to go through the General Assembly. You don't know what the final end product will look like.
Yeah.
So
I was asking for a point of clarification. It sounds like you're saying it's not just moving to say, yes, we want to move forward with this. It's moving to say, yes, we want to move forward with asking for all of it. Or are you saying if you ask, it's either a yes or no?
Well, yeah, what I would make is, I guess, primarily the distinctional difference between rezonings and zoning map amendments. A rezoning, as it's been applied, is the property is already in the city's jurisdiction.
Like that.
So you're very limited. Whereas a zoning map amendment could include not just rezonings, but initial zonings that are being annexed in.
Right.
Then, if you get that authority, then the city council can decide what it wants to delegate and how. But see what you get from the General Assembly first, and then work within those parameters.
Okay. So we're discussing the petition to ask for authority for the full thing there, it sounds like. At least that's the discussion here, right?
Yeah, I think it's best to go in and ask for as broad of authority as you can get. And then it's going to be up to the 9 of us to figure out exactly how we want to implement it through our local ordinance.
Yeah. Agree.
Anyone online with questions or comments? Okay. So we'll get this to the legislator, to our representatives by Wednesday. Need a vote?
Fred Baggett, our former city attorney here, lives in Raleigh and is our lobbyist in the General Assembly, has already drafted a broad bill that he has sent to Joanne and myself, and we'll get back with Fred and ask him to move forward. It has to be introduced by a member of the local delegation, and I think he was going to talk to Representative Fairclough about doing that on our behalf for Wednesday.
Is there any action that needs to be taken by council on this?
Well, it probably wouldn't hurt to.
Yeah.
I think it would be good for the record.
Yeah.
Yeah, have a vote for the record.
Okay. And
how should the
I'll
motion-
entertain a motion. Go ahead.
Go ahead, you
Mayor
got
Pro Tem.
You got it. I was going to ask legal to help with the wording on the motion. I mean, to make a motion
He's
for,
got a note.
I'll come up with it.
all right.
All right. I'm going to make a motion then that we ask, or that we submit a local bill to the General Assembly through our representatives, asking for broad authority to delegate zoning decisions, not zoning map amendments, but zoning rezonings to our planning board. Is that broad enough? Or you wanted me to go broader than that?
I would say, did you say zoning map amendments? Is that what I'm sorry?
Well, that's what I was going to
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
Do you
Zoning
want
map
to
amendments.
include that, just in case you want to take advantage of that at a later time? And you may want to go ahead and include some language. I mean, Fred has it already in his draft about the appeals, how they would be coming to city council.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would rather keep that broad so that we can decide how we want to
And it
allow appeals.
it is in the language that he's recommended thus far as
Okay.
well. But-
Is the part about the removal of third-party rezoning 160D, does that need to be in the motion, or is that something that will come after?
If you would, I'll pass that bill on to Joanne, so she'll have that information with it. But I would, it will, I think it will clear things up if you do that. And because then otherwise, if you pass that authority on to the city, to the P and Z, then P and Z, if they ever wanted to do, say, a comprehensive zoning map amendment, they'd have to come to city council to have it initiated and then go back to them to have it approved. So it's you're talking about timeframe.
So I'll add that to my motion as well, the inclusion of the repeal of that prior legislation. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Hudson. Is there any discussion on the motion?
One more point of clarity. This is Councilman Jefferson. So in repealing, and now I'm probably gonna get the number wrong, but the former local bill that we had for that prevented third-party petitioners, I think is what it is. If we do that, that's because that deadline is this Wednesday, right? As well, or just the deadline for new is this Wednesday?
The deadline for any local bills, as I understand it, is for Wednesday. So this would be repealing a local bill that was enacted in 1990.
Yeah, so my point of clarification is the deadline to not only introduce new, but the deadline to ask for one thing to be repealed is also this Wednesday.
Anything to do with local legislation?
Anything to do with local legislation is this Wednesday. So I guess also for a point of clarification, just getting a thought out here, is that we repeal, even though we have not made the decision of how we'll actually delegate that power yet. And we may very well get to the conversation in which we don't agree on any type of delegation, but that would still be repealed.
Yeah, it would still be repealed if enacted.
Yeah.
But what governs right now is, remember I said 160D now prohibits third-party rezoning. So you have like a dual layer. The way the special bill was worded, it basically said only the city council and the landowner can file an application. The way the state statute is wording, it says third-party rezonings, i.e. somebody other than the city in the broader context, and the landowner can't file an application. So what that basically means is the Planning and Zoning Commission, if you apply them both together, the Planning and Zoning Commission cannot file an application, even under 160D. So if you remove the special legislation, it enables the city council to decide who amongst within the city can file a zoning map amendment, whether it's a city manager, whether it's Planning and Zoning Commission, whatever, can file a zoning map amendment application.
It's going to give us more flexibility.
Okay, so we're getting flexibility, not just on those ruling on decisions, but also those who can actually make the applications. That's what I want clarification on. Thank you so much.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. Councilman Holmes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Councilman Johnson?
Aye.
Councilwoman Peters?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Moore? Aye. Councilman Williams?
Aye.
Councilman Hudson? Aye. Councilman Jones?
Aye.
Councilman Jefferson?
Aye.
And the mayor votes aye, so that item is approved by a vote of 9-0. Thank you, folks. All right. Next on the agenda is the results of our 2020 resident survey.
Mr. Mayor, Council, this is Eric Olmedo, Assistant City Manager. We have for you today the update for the citizen survey. Just a little history. We started doing a city survey with ETC Institute back in 2007. So this is the 7th iteration of this survey. We have with us today online Jason Morado from ETC Institute. He's our consultant, and he's going to go over a presentation of the data. We also have in your packet the full survey. It's very detailed. So as you look at that over the next few days or weeks, if you have any questions on that, please let me know, and we'll be happy to get you some answers. But I believe Jason's going to take over and present. Jason, are you with us?
Yep, great. Thanks, Eric. Can everyone hear me okay and see the screen?
Don't have the screen yet.
Okay.
We have it remotely. We can see it.
Okay.
Coming up now.
Okay.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Mayor and City Council. My name is Jason Morado. I'm the Director of Community Research at ETC Institute. And ETC is a marketing research firm based in Olathe, Kansas, which is in the Kansas City area. And the thing we specialize in is conducting community surveys for local governments. And we just finished conducting a resident survey for the city of High Point. So today I'm going to go through the results of the survey. As Eric said, the full report is very detailed and comprehensive. So today I'm going to go through the high-level key findings from the survey. Just have one slide about ETC Institute. We're based in the Kansas City area, but we're a national leader in providing market research for local governments. We've been doing this type of work for over 35 years. And in the last 10 years alone, we've conducted surveys in more than 900 communities in 49 states. And that includes a lot of work throughout the state of North Carolina. So this is really the type of work that we specialize in. This is just a quick rundown of what I'll go through today. I'll go over the purpose and methodology of the survey. What I call the bottom line up front is our main conclusions from the survey. And then I'll go through the major survey findings to show we came to those conclusions. And if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer those. So there are several reasons to conduct a survey like this. One is to get an objective assessment of how satisfied residents are with major city services, and then also to determine what residents feel are the top priorities for the community. We're also able to measure trends from previous surveys. Each year we tweak the survey a little bit, but a lot of the questions remain the same year after year. That way we can measure the trends, both long-term and short-term. And then we're also able to compare your results with other communities across the country. So just a little bit about the survey. The printed version of the survey is 7 pages long, which is a pretty typical length for a resident survey. The survey was administered by a combination of mail and online to randomly selected residents throughout the city. Our goal was to receive at least 400 completed surveys, and we had a good response. We ended up with 407. And one thing we always do when we're conducting these surveys is as we're administering the survey, we are monitoring the demographics of survey respondents to make sure we have a good representation by key demographic areas, such as race and ethnicity, age, and gender. And the results of the 407 surveys at the 95% level of confidence has a margin of error of plus or minus 4.8%. So essentially that means that if we conducted the survey the same way 100 times, 95 times the results would be plus or minus 4.8% from what we're reporting. So the results aren't perfect, but really it's a very small margin of error. Here we have a map of the city. The red dots are households that completed the survey. So we had a very good representation throughout the city. So here are our main conclusions from the survey, boiled down to one PowerPoint slide. Overall, the satisfaction ratings this year are similar to what they were in 2018, which is a good thing because of everything that's happened over the past year. And the results were pretty good back in 2018. When we compared your results to other communities, in some areas you rated higher than other communities, some areas lower, but there were a couple areas that I especially want to point out. You rated higher than other communities when you look at the overall quality of city services. And this is one of the most important questions on the survey, because here we're asking residents to take into account all the services that you're providing and give an overall satisfaction rating. So High Point rated 17% above the US average and 12% above the regional average in the overall quality of city services. And another area that really stood out was customer service from city employees. High Point rated 33% above the US average and 35% above the regional average in customer service provided by city employees. And then we found the top overall priorities are maintaining streets, sidewalks, and infrastructure, economic development, police services, and enforcing codes and ordinances. So first, we'll look at some general perceptions that residents have of the city. Here we ask residents to rate their perceptions of the city in a number of different ways. So the dark blue are ratings of excellent, the light blue is good, the gray is neutral, and we interpret neutral as meeting expectations. It's a rating of a 3 on the 5-point scale. And then the pink and red are ratings of below average or poor. So the blue ratings are positive, the red are negative. You can see that overall the positive outweighs the negative. And the area I especially want to point out on this chart is this top row, overall quality of city services. 65% of residents gave positive ratings, only 8% negative. So you have more than an 8-to-1 ratio of positive to negative ratings for the overall quality of city services, which is an excellent ratio. Typically that ratio is more about 4 or 5 to 1. Later on in the survey, we ask about some more specific areas within some of these categories. So again, the blue is positive, the red is negative. You can see overall the positive ratings far outweigh the negative. And one of the things that really stands out here is how few residents are dissatisfied for any of these areas. Other than streets, sidewalks, and infrastructure, for everything else, less than 20% of residents were dissatisfied. And even for streets and sidewalks and infrastructure, you had more positive ratings than you did negative. If you go to the top of this chart, you can see the highest rated areas are the quality of fire services and response to emergencies, trash recycling and yard waste, library services, parks and recreation, overall police services, and customer service. Here we have a map of the city, and what we did here is we broke the results out by a census block group. So these are very small areas. And what this does is it tells us if residents in different parts of the city are rating services differently or have different perceptions of the city. We created a map like this for every question on the survey asked on a 5-point scale. So there are over 100 maps in the report. This one is for the overall quality of city services. And you can see most of the map is blue. There are a few areas that have the yellowish color, which means the ratings are average. But there's no orange and no red, which means there are no areas where residents are dissatisfied with overall city services. And this is a good sign because what happens sometimes is even if the results are positive overall, once you break it into these smaller geographic groups, sometimes you see some pockets where residents are dissatisfied. But here the results are positive throughout the city. So we also compared these results to previous years. Now, going back to 2018, overall, the satisfaction ratings are similar, but here are the areas that had the biggest increases in satisfaction since 2018. I won't read the whole list to you, but a lot of these areas were related to culture and recreation, environmental and utility, and customer service. The areas with the very highest increases in satisfaction were recreation centers and programs for adults, leaf yard waste and brush removal services, and recreation centers and programs for youth. Here are the areas with the biggest decreases in satisfaction since 2018. There wasn't any one particular category that had the highest number of decreases. It really was kind of just spread throughout different areas of the survey. The biggest decreases were fire inspection program, availability of affordable housing, availability of information about programs and services, hours of operation, and services provided by the library, overall quality of library services. Those are very likely related to COVID restrictions. That's something we've seen all over the country the last few months, is decreases related to library services. We also compared your results to other communities. This chart is for major categories of city services. So I put the blue arrows by the places where you rate significantly above both the regional and national average, red arrows where you rate significantly below. So you can see there are 7 areas where you rate significantly above other communities. And for everything else, your ratings are pretty similar to other communities. There's no red arrows, which means for these major categories of services, there are no areas where you rate significantly below other cities. So the areas where you're outperforming other cities by the most are quality of fire services and response of medical emergencies, trash recycling and yard waste, parks and recreation, customer service. This is one of the areas that really especially stands out. You have a 75% satisfaction rating. The regional and national average are only around 40%. Overall quality of customer services, I mentioned that earlier, another area where you're rating far above other communities. And then stormwater management and then traffic flow. And if you look at the bottom of the chart, your lowest rated areas are streets, sidewalks, and infrastructure, and codes and ordinances. But you can see that that's common in other communities as well. Your satisfaction ratings are pretty much on par with other cities in those areas. Now, the report has the full list of benchmarking comparisons. I wanted to show this chart as well, customer service from city employees. We saw in the last chart that overall for customer service, the ratings are very high. Here we asked about 5 specific areas of customer service. And you can see in all 5 areas, your ratings are significantly higher than other communities. In fact, for most of these areas, you're rating 20% or more above both regional and the national average. So now we'll take a look at top priorities. Earlier, I showed you the satisfaction ratings with the major categories of city services. This is the follow-up question to that. And here we ask residents which areas they think should receive the most emphasis from city leaders over the next couple of years. So you can see the areas that residents think should receive the most emphasis are streets, sidewalks, and infrastructure, economic development, and police services. Now, this is something we call the important satisfaction rating. And this analysis is based on 2 different types of data. First, we ask residents how satisfied they are with the services. And then the follow-up question is, which of these services should receive the most emphasis from city leaders over the next couple of years? So the idea behind this is that those areas that have a combination of a low satisfaction rating, but are also rated as the most important, should be the highest priorities. So based on that, this table is for major categories of city services. The top priorities are maintaining streets, sidewalks, and infrastructure, economic development, and then enforcing codes and ordinances. For transportation and roadway services, the top priorities are the condition of major city streets. Residents rated that as a little more important than maintaining neighborhood streets. And then the other high priority is the availability of pedestrian walkways and sidewalks. For public safety and emergency services, the highest priority was efforts to reduce neighborhood street level drugs, prostitution, and other crimes. The other very high priority was visibility of police in neighborhoods. And then the third highest priority was efforts to ensure the community is prepared for natural disasters or crisis. For neighborhood services, the highest priorities are enforcing the repair of substandard housing and enforcing the removal of dilapidated housing. Some other high priorities were the availability of affordable housing and then the quality of public housing. And then for cultural and recreation services, here the highest priorities were special events and festivals, receiving information on parks and recreation programs, providing that information to residents, and then the availability of walking and biking trails. And for environmental and utility services, the highest priorities were the overall value, for electrical utility rates and water and wastewater utility rates. So we've got some other findings to take a look at. Here we asked residents if they're aware of the Keep High Point Beautiful effort and programs. So just over half, 53% of respondents said they are aware of the Keep High Point Beautiful programs. In 2018, only 40% were aware. So we've had a significant increase in awareness over the past couple of years. Here we asked residents to rate the importance of various reasons when deciding where to live. If you look at the top of this chart, the most important reasons are safety and security, quality health care, and the quality of housing. For each of those three, over 70% of respondents said that's a very important reason when deciding where to live. And then we asked residents to rate the importance of various city topics. So if you look at the top of this chart, most residents feel it's important to provide incentives to attract new full-time private sector jobs. Most also think it's important to provide incentives to attract and retain new retail development and restaurants. And most also think it's important to provide incentives to attract and retain businesses and industries. So that's everything that I had. Just a quick recap. Overall, the satisfaction ratings are similar to 2018. There were a couple of areas that really stood out when we compared your results to other communities. Those were the overall quality of city services, and then especially customer service from city employees. And the top overall priorities were streets, sidewalks, and infrastructure, economic development, police services, and enforcing codes and ordinances. So with that, does anyone have any questions or comments? Anyone?
Yeah, this is Councilman Holmes. So the surveys seemed really geared towards the perception of public services. From that, how are we to glean the overall attitude of the city? Like, what would be the interpretation from, just because you could be very happy with, a certain section of what the city provides, but still find, things lacking. So, an overall sense of this, when you say this is compared to 2018, are we, making gains, or are there areas where, we can target pinpoint specifics to make improvement? What is your overall assessment of how these surveys move us forward?
Sure. Well, there's a couple areas. These important satisfaction ratings, really the purpose of this is to set priorities, because here we're identifying areas that have a combination of low levels of satisfaction, but at the same time, these are the areas that residents are telling you are the most important to focus on. And these are especially useful because you could have a situation where satisfaction ratings are low, but maybe those are areas that residents don't think are that important. So that doesn't necessarily mean you should be investing a lot of resources into an area just because the satisfaction ratings are low. This factors in both satisfaction and importance. Other areas to take a look at are these trends. And the full report has a lot more detail than this, but these are the areas that have had the biggest increases and decreases in satisfaction since 2018. And this includes city services, but then there also are a couple questions about just general perceptions of the city. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. In terms of your population, could you give us your methodology of choosing the population, like specifics? And did we exceed our return rate, or did we miss our return rate in terms of responses?
We were right on target with the return rate. Our goal was to receive at least 400 completed surveys. That's a pretty standard sample size. That gives you a margin of error plus or minus 4.9%. at the 95% level of confidence, which is a standard, standard margin of error. So we were right on target where we wanted to be. And each year we end up right around that number, just a little over 400 completed surveys.
Do you think, do you think in terms of your representative sample that 400 responses adequately captures, for a city our size?
Yeah, I do. I think 400 is an adequate amount. If you do more surveys, you shrink that margin of error, so the results become a little more accurate. But then obviously that's more expensive as well. But 400 surveys it's an adequate sample size. The results are definitely statistically valid and it's a pretty standard sample size.
That's pretty typical to what we've had in the past too. That somewhere around 400 is normally what we get.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The other key to that is making sure not just that we have those 400 surveys, but that the demographics match up with the actual demographics of the city. So we had a very good representative sample by race and ethnicity, age and gender, and then geographic location. So that's the other part that's important to track to make sure these results are accurate.
Thank you.
This is Councilman.
Go ahead.
This is Councilman Jefferson. Maybe it's a question for staff, I think, on this one. From the information we get from this, I imagine there are some conversations maybe to correlate some of these numbers with, albeit events or initiatives that have happened here locally, maybe that we've enacted or just maybe they've happened. So I imagine some of these numbers, we would chalk some of the numbers up depending on when we got them to perhaps COVID or some of the great numbers we've gotten because of downtown revitalization. Do we take these and maybe say, based on what we're seeing, we would say that maybe these numbers are increasing because of these initiatives or something like that? I mean, I imagine looking at some of these in my mind, I'm hoping that some of the increases in recreation centers doing so well is just because Lee Tillery is so darn awesome. But I know that there's probably a number of other great things here that we could attribute these to. So that way, maybe we're drawing comparisons, or not comparisons, but correlations between the data and the actual initiatives / events that have taken place. Are you getting what I'm saying?
Yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying. I think for some areas you have to consider what impact COVID has had, like the library services. Ratings for libraries are down all across the country because they've been closed or had limited hours. I will say for the recreation centers, I was impressed and surprised these results have increased as much, because that's another area that's had some decreases because of COVID, a lot of times with more limited hours. So that really stood out to me. But I think you do have to consider what impact COVID had on some areas.
I'll add in, when I went through and looked at this in some pretty good detail, there are some things that really stand out. I think showing up on the screen now is aquatic-based programs. The satisfaction has increased, even though we had City Lake Park and our other pools closed for the last year. So some things you have to go through and look at and kind of question, why would that be the case? But as far as, we also look at this for validation for budget requests that are made, that we look at where we have increased funding in the past, we see improvements in customer satisfaction. I think when you go through and look at a lot of these, you see a lot of things that have that we feel like we've really made progress in with our citizens. It shows on the survey that because we've added resources to one area or another, and we've made recommendations to the city council to fund certain things based on areas where we've had not where the satisfaction is not so great. So I think we use that in that way. It's not a one-for-one relationship, but it does help inform what we bring to city council to consider in budget discussions.
And I also know that various departments take their sections of the survey and discuss it within their management structures in their departments and use it to guide not only changes in services, but also budget requests. And as Eric pointed out, we certainly in the manager's office look at the results of this and try to work that into budget numbers that we present to y'all.
Thank you.
I did also want to mention that we will have this survey as well as the previous 7 surveys that we've done are all going to be on the website currently. This will be added this week.
I think it's also certainly worth pointing out what a great job our staff does in customer service, and the fact that we are rated so much higher on a national basis. We know we've got good people, and that our folks work hard and do a great job. And so it's nice to see that feedback from the community as well. It's, so many times we only hear the complaints. And so it's always nice to hear when things are going well, and being able to have a community-wide survey that backs it up is terrific.
Second.
Yeah. Anyone else with any questions about the survey? Okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor,
Thanks, everyone.
and apologize to those that aren't present here because I have a hand that I've laid at each of your location that looks like this. And it entails some recommendations from the North Carolina League of Municipalities on a couple pieces of legislation that is moving through the General Assembly now. One is House Bill 119, which is property tax relief for COVID-affected businesses. The other is House Bill 7, which is protect city employees from retaliation. Both of these on the surface sound very advantageous for the city to support. However, good intentions aside, the league has reviewed these pieces of legislation and are asking us to contact our local delegation and oppose these 2 pieces of legislation. By us doing that gives the league a little bit more authority, if you will, so that they can negotiate with various members in the General Assembly to try to bring about changes that they think need to be made to this, or in some cases, just purely to oppose it. Let your feelings be known to oppose it, that there are other ways to handle these. And I think in both of these cases, the league is very specific that they would like us to reach out. So what I would propose, and I know you're just now receiving this, and those that are not physically present, except for Monica, which I knew she wasn't going to be here, so I sent her a copy of it. I would like for you to quickly review this and maybe send me an email or something letting me know your feelings, because what we'd like to do is prepare something for the mayor's signature, if he's so inclined, to send out to our delegation, giving the council's feeling regarding these 2 pieces of legislation.
Thank you. All right, with that, I will make a motion to go into closed session for economic development and personnel purposes. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Jefferson. Is there anyone opposed to going into closed session? Okay, so we are now in closed.
I don't hear.
right. Watch out for the hot mics. We're back live? Yes. Okay. Okay, council is now back out of closed session, and I don't believe there's any additional business for our special meeting. We'll reconvene at 5:30, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
So moved by Councilman Jefferson. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Johnson. Is there anyone opposed to adjourning the meeting?